Bonjour, good day. I'll have an opening comment and then I'll take your questions. We all have heard the stories of people that are really struggling with the cost of living. It's squeezing people in a way we have not seen before. Cost of groceries up, cost of rent, of mortgage, everything is higher, so people are really feeling that squeeze. And they're also looking at an upcoming winter and they're worried about the increased costs that are going to come with having to heat their homes. In a time as difficult as that, people are looking for some relief. And the Liberal approach has been to help, of course, people in Atlantic Canada, much needed relief. But the Liberal government's approach is one that divides the country. It provides help to those that live in the ridings where the Liberals are worried about losing their seats and doesn't provide help across the country. It is a divisive approach. It's really an out-of-touch approach. The Liberals thought, and Justin Trudeau thought he could just do this and no one would notice how unfair it was. It just shows how out of touch Justin Trudeau is. And we know that the approach that what we're proposing is, what we got to do is give all Canadians a relief. And so that's what we're saying. Let's take the GST off of home heating. That's going to provide relief to all Canadians. That's the right thing to do. We've made a decision as a nation that we take GST off of essentials. Home heating in a country as cold as ours is an essential, and we need to take the GST off of home heating. That will provide some relief right away. But we also want to fight the climate crisis, and Canadians want to as well. But they want to do it in a way that's fair. And so what we're saying is, let's provide people the ability to swap out their windows for better insulated windows, put in more insulation, get a heat pump. And a lot of the reasons why Canadians don't make these choices is just too cost prohibitive. It's just too expensive. So let's provide ways for people to make those better choices by giving people access to programs that make it easier to put in that heat pump if they want to do that, if they put in better insulation. And to ensure that we can pay for these programs, let's take on the oil and gas companies which are making record profits. Let's put in a windfall tax like the United Kingdom has done and say, let's take on the oil and gas companies that are making record profits, use that revenue to provide some real relief to Canadians and give them a real option. One thing is certain about the Conservatives, though. Pierre Poilievre is not who he pretends he is. He likes to show that he takes on the challenges that people are faced with. You'll never hear him take on the powerful. He'll never punch up. He doesn't take on the powerful. You'll never hear him take on the grocery CEOs. You'll never hear him take on the oil and gas sector. You'll never hear him take on the wealthy and the powerful because he does not punch up. He punches down. He takes on the weak. He takes on those who are vulnerable. He does not take on the powerful. And so you're not going to see him take on the wealthy executives of the oil and gas companies. New Democrats are. Our approach is to bring people together. Our approach is to unify. While Justin Trudeau wants to divide, while Pierre Poilievre doesn't even acknowledge that we have a climate crisis and won't take on the powerful and the rich, we're going to take on the CEOs, make sure Canadians get some real relief, bring people together, and fight the climate crisis in a way that's fair. That's our approach. Donc, l'approche du gouvernement libéral dans ce temps difficile où tout le monde a des difficultés à rejoindre le debout, c'est de diviser la population. Il propose un coup de main pour la région atlantique, un coup de main nécessaire, mais un coup de main qui divise la population. Parce que ça montre comment les libéraux et Justin Trudeau est déconnecté avec les gens. C'est une mauvaise approche. Ce qu'on propose, c'est qu'on doit enlever la TPS de chauffage domestique. Ça va aider tout le monde, tous les Canadiens. Ça, c'est une approche qui unifie le pays au lieu de diviser les pays. En plus, ce qu'on propose, c'est de donner un coup de main aux gens pour choisir des alternatives pour chauffer la maison qui sont plus abordables et qui aussi réduisent les émissions. Ça, c'est une approche encore qui rassemble les gens. Finalement, pour payer la facture pour tous ces programmes, ces idées, on propose de mettre en œuvre une taxe sur les profits excessifs des grandes entreprises pétrolières comme le Royaume-Uni a fait. Ça, c'est une approche aussi qui va aider les gens. Et je veux aussi mentionner que Pierre Poilievre n'est pas qui il prétend être. Il ne va jamais faire face aux cupidités des grandes entreprises. Il ne va jamais se tenir debout contre les grands PDG des grandes entreprises pétrolières, ni les grands PDG des entreprises épiceries, parce que ce n'est pas ce qu'il fait. Ce n'est pas là pour défendre les gens. Il n'a pas le courage d'attaquer les grandes entreprises et les super riches. Donc, notre approche rassemble les gens, donne une façon de faire face à la crise climatique qui unifie les pays. Et c'est notre proposition. With that, I'm ready for any questions.
Mr. Singh, how do you respond? Vous n'avez pas peur que la tarification sur le carbone, du fait qu'on on enlève ici, on enlève là, qu'elle n'ait plus de valeur, puis qu'au final, la question des changements climatiques ne prenne le second rang au Canada, si on donne un congé à tout le monde?
C'est exactement la critique que j'ai entendue. Je suis tout à fait d'accord que l'approche du gouvernement libéral effectivement nuit aux efforts de faire face à la crise climatique parce que ça nuit aux efforts de unifier les pays. Donc, quand j'ai parlé avec les gens, les Canadiens savent qu'on est dans une crise climatique et on doit agir. Ils sont tout à fait d'accord, mais ils veulent le faire dans une manière juste, une manière où tout le monde a une approche qui est juste. Au lieu de l'approche du gouvernement libéral, ce qu'ils ont proposé, c'est une approche divisive. Ça nuit aux efforts de trouver un chemin ensemble pour tous les pays. Donc, je suis tout à fait d'accord avec les critiques que cette approche c'est une érosion d'unité pour ensemble faire face à la crise climatique.
Can you clarify why the NDP wants to have the GST removed from home heating rather than exempting it through the carbon tax?
We believe, one, that taking the GST off of home heating is immediate. You'll get an immediate relief. It covers all Canadians, and it's something that is in line with the principles around. If you look at the other GST exemptions, it's for things that we consider essentials. We think that home heating is essential. It's an immediate relief. It can be done right away, and it provides that relief for people.
So are you no longer supporting?
I'll just finish the question.
Okay.
And then we believe, though, that obviously there's a cost on pollution, and we think that makes sense. But we don't want Canadians to have to pay for the cost on pollution if there's no alternative. And that's why we're saying, alongside the idea of a cost on pollution, there has to be a solution that's an alternative, like giving people help with better insulating their homes, giving them solutions for getting a heat pump. That's got to be alongside the idea of making sure people make better choices.
And just to
Just a
clarify,
follow-up
though,
yeah.
are you no longer then calling for an end to fossil fuel subsidies?
Absolutely. The subsidies that we're
Putting taxes on fuels, that would be a subsidy, right?
well, let's be really clear. I'm calling for an end to the fossil fuel subsidies in terms of the federal government giving public dollars to oil and gas companies directly. That is wrong. That should not be happening. We've long called for that to end. To give Canadians a break is very different from giving oil and gas companies a direct subsidy. And that's what's happening right now. Billions of public dollars go directly to oil and gas companies by the Canadian government. That needs to end. Giving Canadians a break on heating their homes by getting the GST off of home heating is very different.
So you said that we need we need programs to help people put in better insulation or buy heat pumps. Don't those programs already exist? Isn't there already a zero interest loan or an interest-free loan, I guess, for people to do that? And now this whole separate program that for many people will be a free way to get a heat pump?
There's still a lot of barriers. The programs that exist don't provide enough support for people, particularly lower income families. There's still a lot of challenges, and there's been a lot of critiques of the current approach that it doesn't actually give the help that all Canadians need. The new subsidies or the new approach that's being proposed that only applies in certain areas is more aligned with what we're looking for in terms of giving people help. But again, it's that divisive approach, that out of touch liberal divisive approach that helps some and not all. What we're proposing is let's take a unifying approach here. We all get that there's a climate crisis that's hurting Canadians and it's hurting the world. We all understand that there's a serious challenge to the cost of living, that people are faced with a high cost right now. It's a lot higher than it's ever been. So let's take an approach that addresses that. GST off home heating, help for everyone to get the insulation or the heat pumps they need, and let's tax the high profits of the big oil and gas companies that have made record profits with a windfall tax to pay for it.
And I'm wondering if you could comment on Minister Hutchings' comments on the weekend suggesting that if prairie provinces elected more Liberals, maybe they would also be able to get carbon tax carve-outs.
I think she basically said the quiet part out loud. She's making it really clear that this is a divisive approach, that the Liberals are trying to divide the country over this point. And the fight against the climate crisis, in my opinion, should not be something divisive. It should not be something that we score political points on. It is clear that we are up against it. I've met with families and they've told me directly, we are seeing in our lives the direct impact of extreme weather. We are seeing weather like we've never seen before. Floods and then extreme droughts in the same year. I've been to communities, I've visited them. They had extreme flooding and then they had extreme droughts and forest fires within a year. It shows that there's a serious problem. We've got to tackle it. Canadians want to do that, but we've got to do it in a way that brings us together, that's unifying, not in a divisive way, and not ignoring that there is a crisis like the Conservatives, and not dividing people over it like the Liberals. But the way we're proposing, let's come together and solve this by working together and fighting together.
J'aimerais vous entendre sur la crise au Proche-Orient. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez
De quelle crise?
La crise au Proche-Orient.
Israël.
Israël-Hamas.
Oh oui.
Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de la réaction du gouvernement canadien à ce jour? Croyez-vous qu'elle soit suffisamment ferme par rapport à Israël, par exemple?
Nos critiques, premièrement, on est d'accord avec la dénonciation de Hamas comme un groupe terroriste et leur attentat horrible. J'ai parlé avec des familles ici au Canada, des familles juives qui ont des proches qui, à ce moment, sont des otages. Donc, j'ai parlé avec ces familles. Je comprends comment c'est un temps incroyable. C'est difficile. J'ai pas les mots pour décrire comment c'est difficile. Donc, c'est pourquoi notre approche, c'est on demande que les otages soient libérés. Mais notre critique du gouvernement libéral et de Justin Trudeau, c'est à ce moment, il y a plusieurs voix qui disent que c'est maintenant le moment d'appuyer un cessez-le-feu. Le chef les Nations Unies, les organismes de santé à travers le monde, des autres leaders, des autres organisations, tout ont commencé à demander un cessez-le-feu. C'est ce qu'on a demandé. Et donc, notre critique du gouvernement libéral, c'est le fait qu'il y a la violence horrible envers les gens qui habitent en Gaza. Et c'est nécessaire pour le Canada de prendre une position, de demander un cessez-le-feu et que les otages soient libérés pour sauver les vies. Et c'est une position que je dis que le gouvernement libéral n'a pas pris et doit prendre.
Possible de critiquer Israël par rapport à l'ampleur de sa riposte? Est-ce qu'on a le droit de faire ça, à votre avis? Est-ce qu'on le fait? Et peut-être en sous-question, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ce qui est arrivé à Mme Jama en Ontario, le fait qu'elle ne puisse plus prendre la parole au Parlement parce qu'elle a émis des opinions contraires peut-être à l'opinion majoritaire?
Je pense que c'est tout à fait d'accord de critiquer les actions du gouvernement, des premiers ministres, et c'est un droit au Canada et c'est un droit essentiel. La liberté d'expression, c'est important. Donc, on doit et on peut critiquer les gouvernements. Et spécifiquement, les actions de Premier ministre Netanyahu, c'est clair que c'est quelqu'un que les Israéliens eux-mêmes critiquent aussi. Donc, c'est tout à fait acceptable de critiquer un gouvernement.
English, please, on Sarah Jama.
Yeah, I didn't
Oh,
get there
I'm
yet,
sorry.
but I will do that too. Et puis, je pense que la motion dans la Chambre en commun où ils ont effectivement silencé Mme Jama, c'est problématique comme un outil qui est contre la démocratie dans ce cas. Mais ce que je peux dire, c'est encore de réitérer notre position. On dit qu'on a besoin d'un cessez-le-feu, les otages doivent être libérés et on doit continuer de trouver des façons pour trouver la paix.
In English?
In English, I said that freedom of expression is something that we support. People should be able to critique the actions of a prime minister, the actions of a government, and that applies to the actions of Prime Minister Netanyahu and to the actions of the government in Israel in terms of the approach to the people of Gaza. That critique is completely acceptable for people to be able to do that under the freedom of expression. In specific, the question around Ms. Jama, the tools of silencing a member of provincial parliament and not allowing them to speak in parliament seems a very undemocratic approach, and we've put out Matthew Green's put out a statement regarding that, but I think that's very clearly an undemocratic approach to silence someone in that manner. And again, I want to reiterate our position. We said very clearly we need a ceasefire. Canada should take that position. We want all hostages released, and we want to see a path to peace.
But on the
Wasn't
NDP,
started-
though,
Green, though, in his statement said that he was frustrated with Jama being ejected from the caucus, and he said it's all too often that racialized people in politics, especially within the Ontario NDP, are treated this way. Do you agree with that?
So there's two statements. One was on the censure, and in respect of the censure, which was a motion by Doug Ford, initiated by the government.
This is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I'll finish that. So by the censure motion, that's clearly undemocratic to silence someone like that. I think that's a problem in the Ontario legislature where there's that type of motion that's allowed to be made. In terms of racialized people, like you mentioned, I think that there's lots of problems in institutions across the country where racialized people are often made to feel like their voices don't count. And that's something that I think is going to require lots of work to address.
But isn't one of the criticisms of Ms. Jama that she wasn't just criticizing the government of Israel, that her comments went beyond that and did at least stray into more problematic territory?
I'm not here to speak about Sarah Jama in specific. I can say very clearly our position. One, on the use of censure, I think that there's clear problems with silencing a member of parliament or provincial parliament that way. And in terms of our position, we're very clear on it. We've condemned unequivocally the Hamas terrorist attack. We are calling for a ceasefire, and we want to see the hostages released, and we maintain that position.
Do you support I just want to clarify this. Do you support Mart Stiles' position that she ejected Sarah Jama from caucus?
That is a decision made by the Ontario NDP, and I can reiterate really clearly our position. We've got a very serious humanitarian crisis going on. We've seen horrific images of babies being pulled out of Rebel, and I just want that to stop. And that's why we're saying we need a ceasefire, and we need all hostages released, and we want to see a path to peace. That's our position, and we maintain that position.
Pourquoi avez-vous choisi une exemption, suggérez-vous une exemption sur la TPS plutôt qu'une autre mesure pour que ce soit plus équitable pour tous les Canadiens par rapport à la tarification sur le carbone? Pourquoi ça plutôt qu'autre chose?
C'était une position qu'on a prise depuis longtemps. C'est une position que Jack Layton a prise à l'époque aussi. Le fait qu'on veut enlever la TPS, ça va donner un coup de main aux familles et c'est une approche qui va rassembler les gens parce que c'est une mesure qui va aider tous les Canadiens. Donc, c'est quelque chose qu'on appuie pour cette raison. C'est aussi quelque chose qui pourrait mettre en place tellement rapide. C'est quelque chose qui va aider les gens dans une manière vraiment rapide. On peut le faire tout de suite. Donc, ça va aider les gens dans une manière concrète. C'est quelque chose qui est, selon nos valeurs, une idée importante de dire que dans un pays assez froid que le nôtre, ce serait raisonnable d'enlever les TPS sur quelque chose d'essentiel comme le chauffage domestique. Et on continue de croire qu'on a besoin des approches pour faire face à la crise climatique, mais on doit la faire dans une manière qui unifie les pays et dans une manière qui donne des alternatives pour les familles.
You've said that the Liberals may have done this climb down in carbon pricing for political reasons. Do you think that they've now lost all their credibility on climate change because of that?
I think they have. I think they have lost their credibility for a long time. They've lost their credibility on climate change. When they promise to reduce emissions and instead emissions go up, when they put in place a plan that should be bringing Canadians together and then use that instead to divide Canadians. And really, in a horrible way over the weekend, the minister made it really clear that is exactly their approach, is to divide Canadians. Who did you vote for? Okay, you get a break. If you didn't vote for us, you don't get a break. That is not the way to build a nation. That is not the way to bring people together. That's not the way to fight the climate crisis, which Canadians agree is a problem. But we do that by bringing people together. We say we're going to do this in a way where all of us are being treated fairly. We're going to do this in a way where everyone's got a real opportunity to choose the more affordable option for heating your home that also reduces your costs, that also reduces emissions. So helping people make those choices to get a heat pump or better insulation or better windows. Let's approach this by bringing people together, not dividing people like Justin Trudeau is doing with this clearly divisive approach, and not by ignoring the problem like the Conservatives who don't think we have a climate crisis. We do. And let's also take on the powerful. Let's take on the oil and gas companies that are making massive profits, not just any old profits, more money than they've ever made in the history of their companies. And we know that Pierre Poilievre will never take them on because he doesn't take on the powerful. That's not what he does. That's what New Democrats do. We will take on the powerful. We will bring an approach that brings people together and that helps us fight the climate crisis.
The fall economic statement is also coming up soon. Can you share what the NDP's demands might be around that?
We want to see the fall economic statement as an opportunity to really respond to people's worries about the cost of living. And we've been really pushing two major things on the cost of living. We're saying, one, let's bring down the price of groceries. the Liberal approach has been frankly ridiculous. They literally asked the CEOs that exploited people and made money off the backs of people in this difficult time, whose profit margins are up, whose profits are up, ask them nicely to stabilize, not even lower the prices, just to stabilize them. And that's come out that that's not even working, that plan is a complete sham. That approach is ridiculous. What we're saying to take down the price of groceries, we need to force the prices to come down by bringing in place better consumer protection and end to price gouging and end to price fixing, using laws to protect consumers. And these laws will end the abusive practices by these large corporate grocery CEOs and ensure that Canadians have better prices. That's the approach. And then on housing, we want to see a real approach that is all solutions, not just one silver bullet, but every solution possible to build more homes that people can afford. Not just any old homes. Because if you build, I talk to people, you build more luxury condos, you build more expensive homes that people can't already afford, that is not going to solve the housing crisis. We need to build homes that people can actually afford. We need to make sure we're investing public money into using the federal land, money and resources that we have towards building homes that people can actually afford. We do need to incentivize building more purpose-built rental, but we need all the solutions. And we're not hearing that from the Liberals or the Conservatives. Our approach is let's use every tool we have to tackle this problem, and we're hoping in the fall economic statement to see some action on housing.
Migration, M. Singh, j'aimerais juste vous entendre. Aujourd'hui, il y a un débat que le Bloc québécois a amené de l'avant. Demain, le ministre Miller est supposé dévoiler ses cibles. Où logez-vous sur cette question? Faut-il que les cibles augmentent, à votre avis?
Je pense qu'il y a un débat important sur la question. On a besoin d'immigration, c'est clair. En même temps, on a besoin des ressources ou des infrastructures nécessaires pour accueillir les nouveaux arrivants. Et je pense que c'est une question importante de savoir si on a l'infrastructure, les investissements nécessaires pour bien accueillir les gens qui arrivent au Canada. Et c'est une question importante.
Ça veut dire quoi? He hasn't really answered. Mais ça veut dire quoi? Est-ce que vous pensez que les seuils sont les bons? Faut-il les diminuer, les garder stables, les monter? Votre préférence, elle est où?
Je peux montrer mes valeurs pour répondre à cette question et on va avoir besoin des experts et de preuves pour vraiment répondre à cette question. Mes valeurs sont, oui, on a besoin d'immigration, on a aussi besoin d'avoir l'infrastructure, les ressources pour les bien accueillir et c'est une question qui est toujours là. Est-ce qu'il y a les bonnes infrastructures, les bonnes ressources, les logements, les choses nécessaires pour les nouveaux arrivants sont là ou non? Et ça, c'est une question pour bien vérifier avec les experts, pour évaluer les preuves, pour décider c'est quoi le bon montant pour le Canada.
Back to the situation in Israel and Gaza. Do you believe what's happening in Gaza is ethnic cleansing?
My position is that I'm just deeply concerned about what's going on. It's horrific. And I think that anyone who's seen the images of what this war or what this violence is bringing on can't help but be moved to tears, can't help but be moved to feel their hearts breaking, seeing all the violence. I know that the people of Israel are continuing to live under fear of ongoing rocket attacks. The people of Gaza are experiencing horrific conditions where it's clearly a humanitarian crisis. And that's why we're calling for a ceasefire. That's why we're calling for the release of all hostages. We want to see a pathway to peace because we cannot continue down the same path.
People suggest that a ceasefire is a pathway to peace only on, maybe not even a pathway to peace, it's just one side. So if a ceasefire is followed by Israel, but Hamas is a terrorist group that can't be trusted to follow it, how does a ceasefire end up being a pathway to peace?
Well, we're seeing more and more people, like the head of the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the Vatican, all saying that the continued violence is only going to result in more death. The continued violence is only going to result in more loss of life and more destruction. And we need to stop that. We need to save lives. And so there has to be an approach that gets us towards peace. More violence is just going to result in more death. And that's why we're saying we want to see a ceasefire. We want to see the hostages released as well. And we want to make sure that we're doing more to see a long-term sustainable peace in the region.
Sorry, just coming back to ethnic cleansing, the reason I asked that question is because one of your MPs, Ms. Kazan, brought that up in the House yesterday. Do you think that is too strong a word or an inappropriate word to use in this situation? Do you respect maybe her choice to use that word?
Leah shared a really personal statement, and she referenced her family, her father, and her grandparents. That was a very personal statement, and I understand that many people in Parliament are sharing very personal statements. about how they are personally being touched and impacted by what's going on in the region. We are all united as a caucus in terms of our demands for a ceasefire. We see the humanitarian crisis. We see the violence continuing to result in loss of life and destruction of people's homes, and we want that to end. That's why we're calling for a release of the hostages and a ceasefire so that we can work towards peace.
You won't call it ethnic cleansing.
I've stated what our position is and where we stand.
Do you have any concerns about these latest discussions about resettling Palestinians from Gaza, suggestions possibly sending them to Egypt? I think I saw one report that said maybe even talking to Canada about resettling Palestinians. Do you have any concerns about even having those conversations and what it means for sort of a two-state solution?
Deeply problematic and deeply concerning, the idea of forcibly removing people from where they are. That is something we're deeply concerned about, and we find it deeply problematic, some of those leaked memos that you're referencing. That's why, again, we are saying that we need to see a ceasefire, we need to see the hostages released, we need to see a pathway to peace, that the approach of removing people from their homes is wrong.
But isn't that the very definition of ethnic cleansing? To remove people forcibly from where they are.
The leaked memo and what's happening, I don't know if that's the same thing. We're referencing the leaked memo that suggests very clearly something that's inappropriate. And what we're saying, what's happening right now, there needs to be a ceasefire to address the fact that there's an ongoing humanitarian crisis and that the hostages have to be released.
Est-ce que je peux vous en poser une dernière sur C-56, ce projet de loi qui est supposé d'être important pour le gouvernement, mais ça fait longtemps qu'il n'a pas été amené au débat. Qu'est-ce qui se passe? Je crois comprendre qu'il y a des négociations en coulisses avec vous, vous le NPD, le Bloc québécois. Pouvez-vous nous en dire plus? Qu'est-ce qui est en train de se passer là-dessus?
J'ai manqué le début de votre question.
56, le projet de loi là, sur le logement, sur la loi sur la concurrence, le projet de loi gouvernemental qui est toujours pas remis à l'ordre du jour, mais le gouvernement dit que c'est important. Il y aurait des discussions entre vous et le NPD, le NPD et le Bloc aussi. Qu'est-ce qui se passe?
En général, ce qu'on fait, c'est d'utiliser notre position de pouvoir pour forcer le gouvernement de livrer plus d'aide aux gens et particulièrement concernant le logement. C'est un grand enjeu, une grande question. Donc, les négociations continuent. On continue d'utiliser la pression sur le gouvernement d'agir et on veut voir des actions concrètes parce qu'à ce moment, c'est un enjeu à travers le pays. Au Québec aussi, j'ai parlé avec plusieurs familles, plusieurs jeunes personnes qui disent que dans le passé, c'est quelque chose que ce n'était pas une grande préoccupation, mais à ce moment, le logement nous occupe beaucoup parce qu'il y a des grandes questions d'abordabilité, une hausse de loyer, hausse de coûts pour le logement. Donc, c'est une grande question. On va continuer de mettre la pression pour aider les gens.
Mais avez-vous des demandes? Parce qu'il semblerait que le gouvernement veut passer un bâillon. Et donc, pour avoir votre appui, il y aurait peut-être y a-t-il une demande que vous faites de votre côté?
Les négociations continuent à ce moment et quand je peux vous donner plus de détails, je vais.
Can I ask you, just unless you have a question?
One more.
One more, okay.
One more.
Just very
One
last,
more.
there's some data that suggests we're heading to a recession. Do you think the government is doing enough to avoid us from falling into that?
We've seen similar the numbers on the GDP, which are either suggesting a flatlining or maybe even a contraction. This is clearly the result of the Bank of Canada's approach, which has been, from the beginning, I've said, flawed. The approach to create a domestic recession in order to deal with inflation is, I think, inherently a bad approach, particularly when the causes of inflation that we're going through right now are not domestic in nature, they're international in nature. And so to apply a domestic solution to an international problem has always been a problematic approach, particularly now when the Bank of Canada's increase of inflation has driven one of the major drivers of inflation now, which is the cost of housing. So it seems very counterintuitive that the Bank of Canada's approach has now created its own problem, which is high mortgage, high housing costs, which are another major driver of inflation. So we've said from the beginning that the federal government, the Liberal government, Justin Trudeau's approach, which has been pretty hands-off to inflation, was the wrong approach. He should have used fiscal policy to address the major concerns around affordability, taken steps to bring down the cost of groceries with better consumer protection, taken real serious steps around bringing down the cost of housing by investing in and building and supporting housing. Because of that inaction, we are in this position where the Bank of Canada has continued to take one approach, which is now potentially going to cause a serious impact on our economy and people's livelihood, potentially employment, and those are all deep concerns for us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Merci, thank you.
Thank you for being so generous with your time.